part of what has interested me in the last years is the question of how architecture practice is expanded. That not all of us want to be builders of buildings, that some of us want to be builders of positions, of new processes, of engaging other domains that have been peripheral to design and to architecture itself. Because by entering into those domains to reorganize them, whether it is political processes or economic models or even social relations, we might find new types of terrains from which to begin to develop a more experimental architecture. I'm interested in that relationship of how formal systems, aesthetic systems, can reflect, can resonate new social, economic, and political structures. That correspondence, that relationship between the political and the formal or the spatial. So one cannot happen without the other. This is what has happened lately, is that architects or architecture has been subordinated to a particular political and economic, which obviously is a more neoliberal agenda, in terms of setting the terms about what buildings can do in this case. So architects, in a way, and I hate to say this, but architects have become decorators of those political and economic models that have been obviously part of the crisis. I mean, the types of political and economic recipes that have produced the crisis have not been questioned at all by architects. And in so doing, we have just been subservient to those models. I'm interested how architects take a more leading role in producing new political and economic configurations that then architecture can facilitate. I have begun to understand in the last years that the best ideas, the most creative intelligence in shaping that city of the future will not come from places of economic power or economic abundance, but in fact will come from places of marginalization, places of conflict and precariousness. My practice is rooted, is embedded in this geography of conflict, this place of collision between Latin America and the United States, and particularly between two cities, Tijuana in Mexico and San Diego in California. It's interesting because the two neighborhoods that I have engaged in my practice, that have become the laboratory for my work, at some point I decided that I wanted to work with the scale of the neighborhood, to really understand the specificity of the political and the socio-economic embedded in these very specific communities, to try to understand the conflicts that are found there. So the two neighborhoods that I've been working with in the last years, one is in Tijuana, it's called Laureles Canyon, where we've been investigating issues of housing and environmental infrastructure inside the slums of this city. In fact, Laureles Canyon, this neighborhood, I many times call it the last slum of Latin America towards the United States. It's a shantytown that crashes against the border in the border wall. And on the other side of the border wall in San Diego, we find the other neighborhood I work with, San Isidro, California, which in fact I call the first immigrant neighborhood into the United States. And part of my interest has been in facilitating or translating informal processes. By that I mean the types of informal economies and densities that one can find in the slums in Tijuana, right? Or in many immigrant neighborhoods in San Diego. The types of alterations that happen in the city when immigrants, for example, come to a neighborhood in San Diego and they build an illegal house behind an official house, or they maybe plug an informal economy into a garage, or they begin to negotiate a property, a kind of private property boundary to share resources and spaces. A lot of these what I call performative relationship to space, to economy, to resources, to collaboration that one can find in these immigrant communities, a lot of that activity is off the radar of the institutions of planning. So while these people, these immigrants, these communities are surviving and they are engaged in their everyday, the institutions ignore those, are indifferent to those types of dynamics. So my work has been researching a lot of those conditions in collaboration with non-profit organizations that are based in those neighborhoods, and together beginning a process to translate a lot of those interesting processes of alteration and adaptation. Some of those stealth activity can be, in fact, the DNA to reimagine land use, to reimagine sustainability today, and so on. But those processes cannot exist on their own. They need to be supported, they need to be translated, they need to be represented towards the institutions. And that's the reason I like to say that architects today need to be mediators and also process builders. And why not to say it? Institution builders, from which again to reimagine a more activist role for architecture. This geography of conflict that is so specific to my work, I'm interested in amplifying this place to global dynamics. And that's when I came up with this idea of the political equator, trying to reimagine the relationship of local and global conditions. Obviously, understanding that the only way to advance and rethink the global today is to engage the local so much more critically. So the radicalization of the local has been part of the work, and so the political equator exposed that the Tijuana-San Diego border, this particular juncture that has been important for me, is in the same corridor, global corridor, between the 30 to 35th degrees north parallel, connecting itself with some of the most contested checkpoints in the world, including Ceuta and Melilla, which is the main border between North Africa and Europe, the main funnel of migration from North Africa into Europe, and also the Israeli-Palestinian border, the most contested territory in the Middle East. So these three checkpoints, which are very clear and very intensive, are in the same corridor, producing what I ended up calling the political equator. So that confrontation again between the local and the global is another important space that architects need to engage today.